All right, so let's go ahead and kind of test out the rig and see where we really need to be focusing our efforts. So noticing that we have influence for this joint right here. Go ahead and turn on my joints so we can see kind of what's influencing what. So my one of the ribbon joints right here has a bit of influence down here around the eye. So what I'd want to do is go in and paint that out and make sure we localize that. The influence here is a little bit sharp. And so what I really want is to have the influence for that ribbon to be really quite smooth. And so when I kind of bend over the ribbon or twist it or whatever, it shouldn't have any sort of like really sharp cutoffs. And so we have enough geometry to where we can support that, that really sinuous kind of bend, but the way that the weight painting is going on here, it's really quite sharp, so we'll need to fix that as well. It's probably the same way, just kind of going throughout the rest of this. Yeah, so we'll need to kind of play around with this. Also with ribbon spines, we're also going to be working with painting the weights on the actual ribbons themselves, since those were bound, and that can help deformations a bit as well. The mantle's not half bad, actually. The beak of those where we're going to have a lot of trouble. Mainly because of that. Kind of sort of looks like Gambit like throwing out like cards or something, and I was like, got a little bow of mesh just being pulled off in nowhere. And so the reason why we have this is because the tip of the beak is really close to like this joint right here. And it's like, hey, I'm closer to this joint than I am this joint. And so I'll make sure I'm going to be skinned with influences over here rather than over here. So that's the reason why we have this kind of stretching problem. So anyway, let's go and work on this. One thing I like to do is I like to set up little animations so that I can scrub through the timeline and have stuff move automatically. So I can continuously paint out the weights, go back and check it, and then paint some more. And I don't have to go back and like repose things and get out of tools that I'm using. I can just still stick with the paint weights tool and then just go down here and scrub back and forth, and then watch the animation and see how things improve. Okay, so that's really, really useful to do. So make sure you guys write that down. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start off actually with the beak. We'll just get that fixed. I'm going to go ahead and set a key at 0 for 1. Let's go to like frame 8 and open the heck out of that beak. Set another key, and then I'm going to go back to 0 at 12. So now I can just scrub through, and I can work on that area too. Then I'm going to go up to frame 16. I'm actually going to get a couple of these areas in. So I'm going to go and grab, let's do all of these tentacles. Set it to 0, 16. Let's go up to 20. Set a key. 24. I'm going to go back to 0. Okay? So now I have two things moving. Then we'll go ahead and do the mantle. So I'm going to check the twist, since the winglets are kind of a big part of this. So I'm just going to be doing some twisting work on here. Something like that. And I'll take the eyes, go up, go down. Guys with me so far? Okay. All right, so we should be able to go ahead and start doing our paint weights. I'll turn back on the ribbon section so I can actually see the joints for the ribbon, so I know which ones I'm actually going to be painting. And then let's go over to the mesh, right click, paint skin weights tool. You don't actually have to go into that submenu if you want to know where it's actually located. You go into rigging, skin, and then you can do paint skin weights under here as well. So 2 ways to get to it. Hold down the right mouse button, paint skin weights, or under skin. So what we're seeing here is the selection of joints that are actually attached to the skin cluster. If it's not in this area, if it's not in this list, then that joint is not in the skin cluster, meaning it was never bound to the skin. All right, so if you need something to be bound to the skin, what could you do to maybe bind it after you already have the skin cluster made? Like say if we're missing a joint and it just got skipped over in the arm, what could I do to add it in? Who remembers? Don't make me go get those Snickers again. Come on, somebody remembers. We talked about this last class. Save us, Ricardo. What is it? Does anyone have an inkling? Okay. It's under skin, edit influences, add influence. And Ansem's sitting there like applauding me. All right, so if I click on one of these joints in this list, you'll see a colored map. It might look black and white like that, but if you click on color ramp, you get a little bit more information. But either way, this is the same information. It's basically a heat map for the influence range of a given joint. That's all it is. So this joint right here, it's tentacle 2, follicle joint 7, has an influence on the mesh from basically like this point to this point, okay? And then you'll see it goes from red, this is like roughly like 90 to 100% influence, and then turns to green and then blue. And blue is like 0% to like 1%. It's pretty low, it's pretty middling. So, so this is a fairly rough fall off. And so then if we go in and take a look, you can kind of see where some of that segmentation is coming in if you look at the actual heat map. Because the segmentation in the bend is basically following the color variation right here. As soon as it goes away from red and orange, you see a kind of stark change from here to here. And so what we'd want to do is to make this a bit more of a gradual color change, because we want that tentacle to not be segmented. We want it to be more rope-like in the movement, right? Okay, so let's go and talk about how we can do that. So let's start off with like our base follicle joint. Okay, so right here. So we're actually going to start painting this one and then work our way up. All right, so some of the influence I'm seeing right here with the eye that I don't want, we can kind of see where that's coming from. So it's because it basically is receiving influence around this eye area, and we just don't need that. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to paint operation. I'm going to leave it on replace. We have 4 of these. We have a scale, add, and smooth. Usually I'm going between replace and smooth. I'm using almost exclusively, I'll just use those 2. Add basically just adds influence on top. But again, I usually just go between replace and smooth. We have options for opacity and value. Value is going to be your top level value that paintbrush is going to give you. So if it's on replace and you set it to like a value of 1, that's 100%. Okay? If you set it to a value of 0.5, it's going to top off at a value of 50%. Okay? If you go to a value of 0%, that's going to what? Any ideas? It's going to what? Give you 0. So that's going to basically remove the weight. That basically acts as a eraser to that area, so it doesn't receive any more weight. So what happens when we do that? Let's find out. I'm going to go ahead and go to a value of 0, and I'm going to leave my brush on a soft profile. Opacity, I'm going to leave that as 1. And look at that, it starts restoring the original mesh because we don't have influence coming from that arm joint anymore. Because those are hitting absolute zeros. So that's why you have little black areas right there. And if I want to be really hardcore about it, I can hit this little full circle, and that's going to be a much harsher value change. It's just going to block everything out to where it has absolutely no value. Yeah, if you look at the deformation, I mean, that's kind of ugly in the opposite direction. So what we need to do is go in and smooth it. So I'm going to go and take the smooth, and I'm just going to click and kind of smooth all this out. It's not the worst idea for, some of the eye region have a little bit of influence, because I mean that's pretty close to where the tentacle is. So you would imagine that if you're kind of having this tentacle is moving around, it would probably move a little bit of the skin right here around the base area. It's kind of like your shoulder. Like if you lift your shoulder, you can feel on your chest the flesh moving up and down. It's just it's just following the movement of the limb. There's going to be some influence somewhere. Now for this curve right here, I'm actually going to be a little bit harsher about it and go in and forcibly kind of smooth out a lot of this. And then if I want to really get into it, I can actually click on the flood right here, and the flood will carry over any operation that I have selected. So if I do replace, it's going to replace everything on the mesh with a value of 1 for that joint. I don't want to do that, but tell you what, let's do it anyways. So basically killed out everything there, or if I do a value of 1, it just completely ruined the mesh. So we don't necessarily want to do that. There we go. So anyway, I'm going to go over to smooth. I'm going to flood this a little bit. And you'll see it kind of just smooths out this whole region. And so that's not too bad. All right. Go to tentacle 2. And for this, honestly, I'm probably just going to go in and smooth out each one of these joints. And you'll see it's kind of gently just taking away some of that segmentation. I believe if I go and actually work with the ribbon, it's going to improve that shape even more. Can someone let him in? Sorry, class door was locked at 8 o'clock, so, you know. Just have to sit outside and interpret what I'm saying. Just kind of review the work that we're doing here. You'll see, again, the heavy segmentation going on right here. But then as we go through and smooth it, it really kind of smooths out that curve. There's still a little bit of it going on, but it does definitely help. Okay, so that looks a heck of a lot better. All right, let's go ahead and check out the ribbon right here. And I basically just want to go in and kind of smooth this out a bit as well. Okay. It actually does not look as good as what we had. I don't like that. Like right here, I was kind of flattening it out a little bit. So, let's check that. Okay, that's better. All right. So, I'll stick with that. Okay, let's go with, now with the other arm, I'm actually not going to be doing the other arm because we can actually copy skin weights and mirror them from one side to the other. So as long as the mesh is identical and symmetrical, we should not have to mirror it over, okay? However, if you're doing a zombie that's not symmetrical, then you'll probably have to do both sides. All right. All right, so let's do the beak. So for this, honestly, it might be easier to do, well, two approaches we could do is one is just going in and trying to paint all this out. or we could flood it out, just completely erase it, and then repaint in the influence. So maybe I'll do a little bit of both to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So with the beak lower and pivot and then tip, maybe I'll go in and replace, go to 0 and flood it, and then same thing for the tip. And the reason why I'm talking about doing this is because this gives us maybe a little more control of where we want the influence to appear versus where it's just kind of immediately being skinned to. Okay, so maybe some of the tougher areas that's harder to access, we can use this approach and kind of paint in what we want. So now that's painted out, I'm going to go in and paint it back in. Since I went ahead and set that key, I can kind of go in and animate the beak a little bit. Be careful about getting little areas that you don't need. So like the little part of the tentacle got caught in there. And we're getting quite a bit of it. Let's go ahead and actually hit smooth. Let's see if we can kind of get a little bit more. And actually, with all these little extra bits, let's use this approach. So I have the ton of these little vertices right here that I could honestly just go in and select. So just grabbing each one of these. We have a editor called a component editor, and what I can do is actually go in there and just give them a value of 1 for the joint that I want them to be attached to. So let's go to Windows, General Editors, Component, and then under the tab for smooth skin, I can actually choose which one of these joints I want them to have value on. And so the columns here are going to be each one of the vertexes that I have selected, and then you'll see the individual joints that they have influence coming from. So what I can do is go in and pick, let's say, I think it should be lower beak, right? Lower beak pivot. And so I can give lower beak pivot, this one right here, a value of 1. And it'll just hammer everything over to that one particular joint. So sometimes if you're having an issue of maybe like a fingertip, when it bends, not everything bends with it the way the beak is not bending with the joint. You can just click all those vertices and then just set them over to, let's say, fingertip joint. And it'll just kind of nail them right over there. So you'll see their values are kind of ranging from like 0.1 to 0.8. So if I just select them all, do value of 1, you'll see all the other influences disappear. And then they jump right over into position for me, which is great. So I can do that again. And so you'll see us kind of cleaning everything up bit by bit. And there we go. Now, is this any better than just painting it out normally? Maybe, maybe not. It really kind of depends on how bad the deformation is. So for the beak, in all honesty, it really wasn't that bad to begin with. So it probably would have been a little bit faster just to paint it out by hand, but at least you are aware of another approach. And so by doing it this way, this might actually end up saving you some time. All right. Let's go back to the beak and just kind of paint out some stuff here. Maybe do it a little bit softer. And so with the beak, especially like some of the flesh like around the mouth right here is probably going to move a little bit with it, but probably not like this much. So we're going to want to go ahead and take some of that out. So I'm going to go to replace. I'll probably turn my opacity down a bit and then turn the value down and kind of go in and paint this out just a bit. Maybe actually turn the value down a bit more. Okay. Smooth a little bit. Now let's test it out and see how it looks. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. Beak tip. Don't need it to necessarily be having influence right here, so I'm going to go to replace, opacity of 0. I'm sorry, opacity of 1. Value of 0 and hit flood, because I don't need that to have any influence there. Really the tip honestly is not really going to serve that much of a purpose for me since the pivot is handling most of that movement, but if you wanted to put some on the tip for the tip of the beak, that's fine, but it's really not going to change the movement very much or really at all. Seeing some of these little guys kind of going off somewhere, like they got a job or something they need to go do. So what's happening here is that they're detecting that there's a influence somewhere else. They're picking up some other influence. My guess is probably the lower beak or the other beak is getting some sort of influence on them. So we can go in and check and see what's going on. But that's the reason why you'll get these little prickly bits that'll pop up whenever you're moving stuff around. It's because they're seeing another influence somewhere. So if we go down to lower beak pivot, you'll see there's a distinct lack of value on each one of these vertices. There's a little bit of value here on the tip, but if we go to the upper beak tip joint right here, you'll see that there is value. You guys see that? Okay. Well, we don't necessarily need that. So a couple options we can do is, one, either paint it out, which is great. If you have some really stubborn vertices that refuse to be painted out, honestly, just select the vertices and then go under skin, and we can do hammer skin weights, which will basically take any outlier vertice weights and basically just to be able to slap on the head and say no, and it's just going to smooth out the weights to their surrounding values. You can also do a prune small weights. It's going to go over the selection or the entire mesh, and basically it's going to say anything that has a value of whatever you set it to. So prune below 1%, it's going to take out those values. This can be good and bad because you may end up losing a bit of your smoothness and your deformations by taking away some of the small weights. But if you have little pieces that keep like popping up and going somewhere else or trying to move a little bit, then this might be a good way to try to hammer some of that down, just kind of like with a one-click solution. Okay? All right, let's work on the other beak and see how that is doing. We have these small weights here. Let's just go ahead and get rid of these. Welcome to class. Good to see you. All right, so the upper beak pivot right here has a ton of influence going on, kind of a lot of different places. Let's just go ahead and paint out some of this, because we honestly don't need all that. And you'll notice this will happen, weights will dance from one joint to the other. So you got to make sure and go back and check things after you paint them initially, just to make sure that they don't end up going too crazy. Because like this beak joint, there's no reason for the wing flaps here to get any of that weight. It's just that they're picking it up because it's asking for, like, let's say like 5 different influences, and so it's got to pick it up from somewhere. So it's seeing that joint as being a viable option. Probably that little tentacle piece does not need any influence here either. Just going to take that out. All right, that mouth looks great. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move down to the mantle. So I'm just going to go through and kind of smooth out some of this. Let's check out the movement. It's not bad. So it's moving a lot around the eyes, which I don't really want. So I believe I should have a root joint here somewhere. Okay, maybe not. So actually, I would like to add in that root joint so that I can do some skinning, just to a central root, just to kind of keep some stuff anchored. So I'm going to go and add that in. So let's go to Mesh, click on the root. It's not the root. Let's do, where's the root? This guy. Yes. Skin, add influences, add influence. And I'm going to tell it to lock weight. The reason why is because locking weight will keep it from automatically adding influences, because I don't really want to screw up what I already have. If you don't lock the weight, it's going to assume some sort of influencing weight on the mesh, and that might screw up like the beak or tentacles or the mantle, and I don't really want that. So we're not going to do that. Click on Add. And then when we go back to our mesh, we should get a root joint right here. There we go. What? Where did I add it? Can anyone else tell her? What do you mean, where did I add it?
Like, where is the joint that you just add?
Right here. It says root join. It just appears in the list.
Oh.
When you lock the weight, is that only for base joints or any joint you just...
Any joint that you add to it, you can lock the weight to where it doesn't add, or it adds at a certain weight preset amount. All right. So the reason why I'm adding in the root joint is so I can kind of lock in some of this area right here, so that when the mantle moves, it doesn't like twist off the eyeballs and all that area. So I just need something that's going to stay put. See a little lock right here. I'm going to go and click that. That's unlocking the weight. Let's do replace. Opacity, I'm gonna set it at 0.4. And we can go ahead. I'm gonna add this in. And we go down to like a 0.1 instead. Seems to be a bit heavy. So then if I go and start moving the mantle around, you'll see it's not moving as much as it was before. Let's take a look at it. So it's better, but it's still pulling a little bit. These little areas that we're cutting through, I'm just going to go through and paint them out. And then around the eyes, I'm going to go a little bit heavier. Let's go just all the way up. And then make sure that we can actually work with the fold here. So I'm going to go through and actually smooth it out. Okay. Something like that. It's caving in a little bit right here on the beak. So let's go back to that beak joint. This is it. Right here. And I need to go in and basically just kind of fill that back in. Because the beak is like a hard object, right? On a squid, it's like a keratinous thing or something. I guess like a parrot. So it makes sense that it wouldn't probably warp or move as the body moves.
So right now you're manually painting both sides of the mesh, but like after
Yeah, I need to for the other tentacle. Honestly, for stuff that's in the middle, I'm just going to paint both sides anyways, just to get it to look good. So. Alright, smooth. There we go. Okay. Cool. All right. Let's go ahead and do the mirrored mesh. I'm going to go and save it real quick before I do mirror mesh, because sometimes it doesn't work the way that you would expect it to. So I just want to make sure we save it before we go any further. I'm going to go ahead and go up to skin, mirror skin weights, and then I need to do it across the median plane for your mesh. Now, depending on the orientation, that might change. So for him, that's going to be basically going from, let's check here, from this direction over to here. And so if I'm looking down the z-axis, the positive z, that's going to be going from the positive x to the negative x. And the median plane would be a plane if we just like shoved it right down the middle of the squid. That would be going down the z and y axes. Do you guys understand where I'm getting this information from? So if I look right here, in the corner, the z-axis is going basically shooting straight through the middle of this, and then if we just cut it in half lengthways, that'd be a plane that'd be facing up the y-axis, and forward and back would be z. So that's its bilateral plane. But we need a mirror from positive x, which is here, to negative x on the other side. Okay, so that's going to be mirror across yz, yz, positive to negative. So we are doing positive to negative. Make sure the character is in a symmetrical pose. Click on mirror. And now when we pose him, we should see similar deformation. So definitely, I'm not seeing the segmentation there anymore. So I'd say that worked. And then we'll check everything else. Make sure the beak still works. We've got a little something that came across right here. You see that? So we'll need to fix that. Okay, but otherwise it looks like it's mostly okay. What could I do to get rid of the influence for that one tiny little vertex? Exactly, hammer. So I'm going to go skin, hammer, and be gone. He's out of here. I'm going to check the skin weights on the ribbon for the mantle. I'd like actually the tip joint on the mantle to have a little bit more control. And so I'm going to go in and paint in a bit more influence right here. And smooth that out. The middle one, it's smooth. And then the first one hits smooth. And so the idea is that now when we move it, it's going to be a little bit more curved, and then the bottom mantle joint or controller, which is going to be basically a control joint down here, should have a little bit more influence on the overall curve rather than like just the tip. Okay. There we go. So something like that. Where before it was just barely moving the tip of the mantle. All right. You guys with me? Any questions? Emily, you look lost.
Video? Hopefully I'll be fine. I'm mostly scared.
Well, I don't want you to depend on the video. I want you to ask me questions if you don't understand something. So what you got? Because you're probably not the only one in here that has questions. So what you got? Okay. You think. But are you sure? Yes, Will.
So the black represents like no movement, it's all just blacked out. And what does white represent?
100%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a bump map maybe? You know? It's going on that same grayscale.
It's like blue is like it's cold, it's not moving.
Sure.
And then red is like
So where's everyone playing hot and cold?
Yeah.
Because,
There you go. It's a game of hot and cold. All right. Let's go ahead and hide. I think we're done with the ribbon spine group. I'm going to go hide that so I don't need to see it. Everything still works. One thing, generally for rigs, what you're going to do is when you're finished with them, if you're setting up keys like I am, you're going to want to select all the keys when you're finished and delete them. So that if this is like referenced into a scene or imported, it does not have overriding animation keys for the animator to have to deal with. And that is not a happy animator when he has to deal with reference to keys that he has to break or go into the reference file and delete himself. Just speaking from experience. It's not fun, especially when it's like your own fault and you forget to do it. So, yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
because I know how you said on our last project that we can set up constraints so the animator doesn't break our rig. Like windows, like hit apart in the influence, like at all, like we would have to go in and fix those.
Okay, so the limitations on rotations for joints or controllers, no. That's not going to play any influence on the painting weights portion. In fact, with this one, you really don't need to be doing any of that with the limitations because this is an organic creature. Especially this one has like no bones, so it really has no limitations on its ability to move. So, yeah, it's not needed. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to go and stop there because that's really all I got to show you today. And yeah, just for the assignment, get him rigged. Basically follow everything I've done. Make sure that we can open and close the mouth, move the tentacles, make sure you have 3 ribbon spines set up. I should be able to move the entire character around. And actually, to be honest with you, I did forget to put a world controller in here, so make sure you have a world controller. So let me put that in real quick. Make sure everything is properly organized. Make sure you delete and freeze your transformations where appropriate. Make sure you name everything. Where am I going to put this Worldcon? Where should it go? Yeah.
On the top of the higher, at the top.
Where? Like, if I'm putting this in post, since I forgot, where would I put it in now?
At the top and drag the split character group under it.
So no, it wouldn't be the character group. Where would I put this controller? Say it. Yeah. All right, but that doesn't really necessarily tell this guy to control anything.
And then you gotta put them above the.
There you go. So now he moves. That's it. All right, and he's done.